The morning sun rose over Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, painting the tarmac in soft gold and long shadows. Planes taxied slowly, their engines humming like distant thunder, while ground crews in bright vests moved with practiced rhythm. Inside Terminal B, the usual pre-flight chaos unfolded. Rolling suitcases, hurried goodbyes, coffee cups clutched like lifelines. Among the crowd walked a woman in a simple navy suit, her dark hair pulled back neatly, a small carry-on slung over one shoulder. She moved without fanfare, blending in effortlessly, though she owned every inch of the airline whose logo gleamed on the jet outside. She hadn't taken the private car service waiting for her that morning. Instead, she'd driven herself, parked in the economy lot, and walked through the same security lines as everyone else. It wasn't a publicity stunt. There were no cameras, no assistants trailing behind. She did this often, once every few months, just to remember what it felt like to be a passenger. To hear the real conversations, notice the worn carpet near gate B12. Feel the slight delay when the boarding pass scanner glitched. Running an airline from a corner office gave you data, spreadsheets, quarterly reports. But walking through the terminal gave you truth. Her flight was Horizon Sky's 422 to Los Angeles, scheduled to depart at 7:15 a.m. She'd booked her ticket under a variation of her mother's maiden name. Nothing flashy, nothing traceable. Seat 23B. Middle of the economy cabin, window side. She preferred it that way. From there she could watch how the crew interacted with passengers, how the overhead bins filled, whether the flight attendants made eye contact or just recited safety lines like a script. She believed an airline's soul showed not in first class, but in row 23. Boarding began just after 6:50. Families with strollers, business travelers with wrinkled suits, a group of college students laughing too loudly. They all shuffled forward in uneven waves. She waited patiently, letting others go first. When her zone was finally called, she moved calmly down the jet bridge, nodding politely to the gate agent who barely glanced up from her screen. Inside the aircraft, the air was cool and smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. She stowed her bag, slid into 23B, and buckled her seatbelt with quiet efficiency. A few rows ahead, a toddler wailed, and a man in a rumpled shirt sighed loudly as if the child had personally offended him. She smiled to herself. This was real life. Not boardrooms. Not press releases. Just people trying to get somewhere. At the front of the cabin, Lila adjusted the knot of her scarf for the third time. Her name tag read Lila Horizon Skies, but her eyes were tired, her shoulders tight. She'd been up since 3 a.m., thanks to a neighbor's barking dog and a text from her sister about a family emergency back home. The crew briefing had run late. Someone called in sick, so they were short-staffed. And now she was responsible for twice as many passengers as usual. She loved her job, truly. She liked the rhythm of the skies, the way strangers became temporary neighbors at 35,000 feet. But today everything felt heavier. As passengers settled in, Lila moved through the aisle with practiced grace, checking seatbelts, offering smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. When she reached row 23, she saw the woman in the navy suit already seated, calm and composed, reading a paperback with a faded cover. No headphones, no laptop, no demands. Just a quiet presence. Water? Lila asked, holding out a small plastic cup. Yes, please. Thank you, the woman replied, her voice low and steady. Lila handed it over. We've got upgrades available if you're interested. Only 2 left. The woman shook her head gently. I'm fine here. But thank you for asking. Something about the refusal, polite, firm, unbothered, pricked at Lila. Not because it was rude. It wasn't. But because it felt like a quiet judgment, like the woman was saying, I don't need your charity. In Lila's exhausted state, that tiny interaction twisted into something larger. She'd been offering upgrades all morning, and most people jumped at the chance. This calm no felt like a rejection of her effort, her goodwill. She didn't know it, but she was already building a story in her head. This passenger thought she was better than everyone else. The engines roared to life. The plane pushed back from the gate, and the cabin lights dimmed slightly. Lila returned to the galley, her mind racing. She replayed the exchange again and again, each time making it sharper, more personal. She didn't notice the woman watching the sunrise through the window, her expression unreadable. She didn't see how the woman carefully folded her book and placed it in the seat back pocket, how she adjusted her seatbelt with care. how she offered a reassuring nod to the nervous flyer in the aisle seat. To Lila, she was just another face in a sea of faces, someone who'd dismissed her kindness without a second thought. And in that moment, burdened by stress and sleeplessness, Lila let her frustration take root. It wouldn't stay buried for long. Outside, Atlanta disappeared beneath a blanket of clouds. The plane climbed steadily, heading west. Inside, the cabin settled into the familiar hum of flight. Soft chatter, the rustle of snacks, the occasional cry from a baby. But beneath the surface, something tense was building. Not in the sky, but between two people who hadn't even exchanged full names. One carrying the weight of an entire company, the other carrying the weight of a sleepless night and a heart that felt unseen. Neither of them knew, as the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, that the next 20 minutes would change everything, not just for them, but for hundreds of crew members and thousands of passengers who would fly horizon skies in the months to come. All because of a single moment, a spark of misunderstanding, and the quiet strength of someone who refused to react with anger, even when slapped in the face. But that moment hadn't happened yet. For now there was only the drone of the engines, the glow of the morning sun through the window, and two women on the same flight, worlds apart, hurtling toward a collision neither saw coming. The flight had been smooth for the first hour, just the steady drone of engines, the occasional announcement about drink service, and the soft rustle of passengers shifting in their seats. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, a pale blue canvas dotted with wisps of cloud. Inside, the cabin felt like its own little world, floating above everything. But beneath that calm surface, tension was building like a slow-burning fuse. Lila had been moving up and down the aisle for the past 40 minutes, refilling drinks, collecting trash, offering blankets to shivering passengers. Her feet ached, her back was stiff, and the knot in her stomach hadn't loosened since that quiet exchange in row 23. Every time she passed the woman in the navy suit, she caught a glimpse of her reading, calm, undisturbed, like nothing in the world could rattle her. That calmness, which should have been admirable, started to feel like arrogance to Lila. In her tired mind, it became proof that this passenger thought she was above the rest of them. Then, without warning, the plane jolted. A sudden patch of turbulence sent overhead bins rattling and coffee sloshing over tray tables. A child in the front let out a startled cry, and a man near the lavatory grabbed the nearest seat for balance. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering some unexpected chop. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Lila braced herself against a seatback, heart pounding. Turbulence wasn't rare, but it always made her nervous. Not for herself, but for the passengers. She hated seeing fear in their eyes, especially the elderly or the first-time flyers. As the plane steadied slightly, she took a breath and kept moving, tray in hand, determined to finish her round before the next wave hit. When she reached row 23 again, she found the woman speaking softly into a small satellite phone. Compact, sleek, not the kind most people carried. Her voice was low, measured, but urgent. "Yes, I saw the report. Hold off on the decision until I land. I'll call you from the terminal." Lila froze. Phones were supposed to be off during flight. Everyone knew that. Even though airlines had relaxed rules about airplane mode, voice calls were still a hard no, especially on domestic flights. She'd corrected passengers for less, and here was this woman, calm as ever, breaking the rule like it didn't apply to her. "Phone's off," Lila said sharply, her voice louder than she intended. "Now!" The woman looked up, startled but not defensive. She ended the call with a quiet, "I'll be in touch," powered down the device and slipped it into her bag. "My apologies," she said. It was an emergency. Lila didn't care. The words emergency felt like an excuse. Another way this passenger thought she was special, entitled to bend the rules. All the frustration from the morning, the sleepless night, the short-staffed crew, the feeling of being invisible, came rushing to the surface. She leaned in, close enough that only the woman could hear her. "Some of us are trying to do our jobs while you act like you own the place." The words hung in the air, sharp and bitter. The woman didn't flinch. She just looked at Lila, really looked at her with eyes that held no anger, only something deeper. Disappointment maybe, or sorrow. And in that look, Lila felt exposed, like her exhaustion and resentment had been laid bare for everyone to see. But instead of walking away, instead of letting the moment pass, something inside her snapped. Her hand moved before her brain could catch up. Slap. The sound was sharp, startling, a single crack that cut through the cabin's hum like a gunshot. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. A woman across the aisle gasped and covered her mouth. The man in 23A slowly unbuckled his seatbelt halfway, ready to stand if needed. The woman in the navy suit didn't cry out. She didn't raise her voice. She simply touched her cheek with 2 fingers, as if testing whether it had really happened. Then she looked at Lila again, her expression unreadable but steady. "You'll want to sit down now," she said quietly. Lila's breath caught. Her hand trembled at her side. Shame flooded her, hot, immediate, overwhelming. She hadn't meant to do it. Not really. But she had. And now the entire cabin was watching, silent, waiting. Before she could stammer an apology, the lead flight attendant appeared at the front of the cabin, alerted by the commotion. His eyes widened when he saw the red mark on the passenger's face. He moved quickly, ushering Lila toward the galley with a firm but quiet, "Step with me." Back in the cramped workspace behind the curtain, Lila's legs gave out. She slumped against the wall, tears welling. "I don't know what came over me," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." The lead attendant didn't yell. He just nodded, his face grim. "We'll handle this on the ground. For now, stay back here. Don't go near her." Up front, the woman remained seated, composed, though her fingers still rested lightly on her cheek. A flight attendant offered her a cold towel. She accepted it with a quiet "thank you" and dabbed gently at her skin. She didn't demand to speak to the captain. She didn't threaten to sue. She simply waited, her gaze fixed on the clouds outside. But something had shifted in the cabin. Passengers who'd been scrolling on their phones or napping now sat upright, whispering in hushed tones. The slap hadn't just struck a face, it had shattered the illusion of normalcy, of control. Everyone felt it. This wasn't just a minor conflict. It was something deeper, something that would ripple far beyond this flight. Minutes later, the captain's voice returned over the intercom, calm but serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an onboard incident, we'll be making an early descent into Los Angeles. We expect to land in approximately 45 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." No one asked questions. No one needed to. They all knew. As the plane began its gradual turn westward, Lila sat in the jump seat at the back, head in her hands, replaying the moment over and over. She thought about her training, her years of service, the pride she'd once taken in representing her airline. Now all of that felt like it was crumbling in her hands. She'd let her emotions take over. She'd hurt someone, and worst of all, she'd done it in front of dozens of witnesses. Meanwhile, in row 23, the woman closed her eyes, not in pain, but in thought. She wasn't thinking about punishment or headlines. She was thinking about people, about how stress can make good people do terrible things, about how systems fail when they don't account for human fragility, and about what kind of leader she wanted to be in the face of humiliation. The plane descended through layers of cloud, sunlight glinting off its wings. Below, the sprawl of Los Angeles began to appear, patchwork neighborhoods, winding freeways, the glint of the Pacific in the distance. Soon wheels would touch down, doors would open, and everything would change. But for now, there was only the hum of the engines, the weight of silence, and 2 women carrying very different kinds of pain, one from a slap, the other from delivering it. Neither knew what came next, but both knew this flight would be impossible to forget. The wheels touched down in Los Angeles with a soft thud, and the plane rolled smoothly toward the gate. Outside, the California sun beat down on the tarmac, bright and unrelenting. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Passengers stayed seated, unusually quiet, as if waiting for permission to move. No one reached for their bags. No one stood up. They all seemed to sense that this wasn't over. Not yet. At the front of the cabin, the lead flight attendant stood near the cockpit door, speaking in hushed tones with the captain. His face was tight, his usual calm replaced by something heavier. Worry, maybe even fear. He glanced back toward row 23 every few seconds, as if making sure the woman in the navy suit hadn't vanished or worse, called the police. She hadn't. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, the red mark on her cheek now fading to a soft pink. She hadn't made a scene. She hadn't demanded to speak to corporate. She hadn't even raised her voice. but her silence carried more weight than any outburst could have. Everyone on board knew something serious had happened, and that it involved someone important. They just didn't know how important. As the jet bridge connected and the doors open chime sounded, the lead attendant stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady but strained, "we ask that you remain seated for just a few more minutes while we assist a passenger with priority disembarkation." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. A few people exchanged glances. Others kept their eyes down, pretending not to notice. But all of them stayed put. The woman in 23B stood slowly, straightened her jacket and picked up her small carry-on. She walked toward the front with quiet dignity, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the wide eyes of children who'd seen more than they should have on a routine flight. When she reached the jet bridge, she paused, not to look back but to take a breath. The airport air, warm and dry, filled her lungs. She exhaled slowly, as if releasing the last of the tension. Outside the aircraft, a Horizon Skies operations manager was already waiting, summoned by an urgent call from the captain minutes before landing. He'd been told only this: a passenger was assaulted. She's requesting to speak with leadership. No law enforcement. Not yet. He stood near the gate entrance, clipboard in hand, tie slightly crooked from rushing. He expected a furious traveler, maybe a lawyer already on speed dial, possibly a social media post going viral by now. What he didn't expect was the woman walking toward him with calm eyes and a faint bruise on her face. His stomach dropped. He knew her instantly. Not from photos or press conferences, but from the early days, when she used to walk through maintenance hangars at 5 a.m., asking mechanics how their kids were doing. From the time she'd served coffee to stranded passengers during a snowstorm in Chicago, because the catering crew hadn't shown up. From the handwritten thank you notes she still sent to employees who went above and beyond. She was the founder. The owner. The reason Horizon Skies had a reputation for treating people like humans, not revenue streams. The manager's mouth went dry. He dropped his clipboard. "Ma'am, I didn't know you were on board." She gave a small nod. "I know," he stammered. "We've already suspended the attendant involved. We're preparing a full incident report. If you'd like to file a police report or press charges." She held up a hand gently. "I don't want that," he blinked. "You don't?" "No," she said. "What I want is to understand how this happened. Not just the slap, but everything that led to it. Was she trained properly? Is she overworked? Did she feel disrespected? Because if our people are so stretched thin that they lash out at passengers, then we've failed them. And if our passengers feel like they can't speak up without being punished, then we failed them too." Her words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. The manager swallowed hard. He'd expected anger, demands, public fallout. Instead, she was asking questions no one else in her position would even consider. "I'll gather the crew roster, shift logs, training records," he said quickly. "Anything you need." "Good," she replied. "But first, was that your best representation of our values?" The question hung in the air. He had no answer. Because the truth was, it wasn't, and she knew it. Back inside the plane, Lila sat in the rear jump seat, arms wrapped around herself. She hadn't been allowed to leave with the other crew. Security had been discreetly stationed near the exit, not to arrest her, but to ensure she stayed until further instructions. She watched through the window as passengers finally filed out, some glancing back at her with pity, others with judgment. One older woman gave her a small, sad smile as if to say, "I've made mistakes too." Lila wanted to disappear. She thought about her mom, who'd worked double shifts as a nurse for 20 years without ever raising her voice at a patient. She thought about her younger brother, who looked up to her like she had it all together. And she thought about the woman she'd struck, how she hadn't screamed, hadn't retaliated, hadn't even flinched. That quiet strength was worse than any shouting. It made Lila feel small, not because she'd been humiliated, but because she'd failed to be the person she wanted to be. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of Terminal 5, the airline's owner sat with the operations manager and the head of crew relations. No press, no lawyers. Just three people trying to figure out how to fix something that shouldn't have broken in the first place. We've had 3 crew complaints this month about understaffing on early routes. The crew relations lead admitted, flipping through a tablet. 2 attendants called out sick last week because of burnout. We're stretching people too thin. And yet, the owner said softly, We keep adding flights, chasing profits, acting like humans are machines that never need rest. She didn't say it as an accusation. She said it as a realization, one she should have had sooner. By late afternoon, a decision had been made. No police report. No public statement. But also no sweeping it under the rug. The incident would be reviewed internally, not as a disciplinary case alone, but as a symptom of deeper issues: fatigue, lack of support, the pressure to perform while carrying invisible burdens. As for Lila, she'd be placed on administrative leave pending a full review, but the owner made one thing clear. This isn't just about punishment. It's about understanding. And if there's a path forward, for her, for us, then we owe it to everyone to find it. Outside, the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the runway. Inside the terminal, Lila finally stepped off the plane, escorted by a supervisor who didn't scold her, didn't glare, just walked beside her in silence. At the crew entrance, she turned for one last look at the aircraft that had carried her through the sky, and her through the worst moment of her career. She didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something she never saw coming, a chance to rebuild not just her job, but her understanding of what it means to serve, to listen, and to be human, even when you're falling apart. Weeks passed. The incident never made the news. No viral videos surfaced. No angry posts lit up social media. To the outside world, Horizon Skies operated as usual, on time, professional, unshaken. But behind the scenes, something quiet and profound was unfolding. Lila spent her days in a kind of suspended silence. She wasn't fired. She wasn't publicly shamed. But she wasn't working either. Her uniform hung in the closet, untouched. Her crew ID sat on the kitchen counter, gathering dust. Every morning she woke up expecting a call. Legal notice, termination letter, maybe even a knock at the door. She rehearsed apologies in the mirror. She wrote letters she never sent. She barely slept. Then one Tuesday afternoon, her phone rang. It wasn't HR. It wasn't security. It was a calm, unfamiliar voice asking her to come to the airline's corporate headquarters the next day. "It's not a disciplinary hearing," the voice said. "It's a conversation." Lila's hands shook as she hung up. A conversation? With whom? About what? She imagined a room full of executives, cold and judgmental, dissecting her mistake like a specimen under glass. She almost said no. But something, maybe guilt, maybe hope, made her agree. The next morning, she dressed carefully. Not in her uniform, but in something simple and respectful. Dark slacks, a soft blouse, her hair neatly tied back. She drove to the sleek glass building near the airport, heart pounding the whole way. At the front desk, she gave her name. The receptionist smiled, not with pity, but with quiet recognition, and handed her a visitor badge. "She's waiting for you in room 304. "She?" The receptionist didn't answer, just pointed down the hall. Room 304 was nothing like Lila expected. No long table, no panel of suits, no recording devices. Just a sunlit space with 2 armchairs, a small coffee table, and a window overlooking the runway. And sitting in one of those chairs was the woman from the flight, the one in the navy suit, the one she'd slapped. Lila froze in the doorway. The woman stood. No anger in her eyes, no disappointment. Just presence. "Thank you for coming," she said. Lila couldn't speak. Her throat tightened. She managed a nod, then sank into the other chair, her hands clenched in her lap. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, a Horizon Skies jet taxied past, its engines rumbling softly. Then the woman leaned forward, elbows on her knees, voice low and steady. "I've been slapped before," she said. Lila's head snapped up. "Not by staff," the woman continued, "but by life. By investors who laughed when I said I wanted to start an airline run on respect, not just revenue. By regulators who told me I didn't belong in boardrooms. By people who assumed I got where I am because of luck, not labor." She paused, her gaze steady. "But I never let anger make my decisions. And I don't expect perfection from people, only willingness to grow." Lila's eyes filled with tears. She blinked hard, trying to hold them back. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "What I did, it was unforgivable. Maybe," the woman said gently, "but unforgivable doesn't mean unredeemable." That word, redeemable, hit Lila like a breath of fresh air after weeks of suffocation. No one had offered her that. Not even herself. I was exhausted, Lila admitted, her voice breaking. My sister's going through a divorce, my dog's sick, and that morning, I just felt invisible, like no one saw me, just my uniform. And when you said no to the upgrade, it felt like you were saying I wasn't good enough. I know that sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy, the woman interrupted softly. It sounds human. Lila looked up, surprised. Stress distorts things, the woman said. It makes small slights feel like attacks. It turns fatigue into fury. I've been there too, standing in a hallway at 2 a.m., crying because someone criticized my presentation, when really, I was just hungry and hadn't seen my kids in 3 days. She leaned back, her expression thoughtful. Running an airline isn't just about planes and schedules. It's about people on both sides of the service counter. And if we forget that, we lose our soul. Then she asked the question Lila never expected. Do you still want to be part of this company? Lila stared. After what I did? Yes, the woman said. Because what you did was a moment. Who you are is something deeper. And I believe people can change if they're given the chance. She explained that Horizon Skies was launching a new program, a training initiative focused not just on safety and service, but on emotional resilience, bias awareness, and human connection. They needed someone who'd been through real failure, someone who understood how quickly stress could unravel good intentions. You wouldn't go back to flying right away, she said. Not yet. But you could help design this program. Share your story. Help others avoid the same mistake. Lila sat in stunned silence. This wasn't punishment. It was an invitation. A second chance wrapped in trust. I'd have to earn it, she said finally. Yes, the woman agreed. Every single day. They talked for nearly 2 hours. About burnout, about dignity, about how service isn't about perfection but presence. When Lila left the building, the sun was lower in the sky, casting golden light across the parking lot. She didn't feel relief exactly. More like the first flicker of something she'd almost forgotten. Purpose. Over the next few weeks, she met with trainers, psychologists, and veteran crew members. She shared her story, not to excuse what she'd done, but to expose the cracks in the system that let it happen. She spoke about the pressure of being always on, the loneliness of working in a crowd, the way small frustrations pile up until they explode. And slowly, something shifted, not just in her, but in the conversations happening across the airline. Crew members started talking more openly about stress. Supervisors began checking in, not just on performance, but on well-being. The new Human First program took shape, built on real experiences, not corporate slogans. Lila still flinched sometimes when she passed a mirror, remembering the look on the woman's face that day. But now instead of shame, she felt responsibility. She wasn't just rebuilding her own life. She was helping build a better way for others to work, to serve, to be human. And in the quiet moments, she'd think about that meeting in room 304, not as a judgment, but as a gift. Because sometimes the most powerful thing someone can do isn't to punish you for falling, but to reach down and say, "Let me show you how to stand again." 6 months after that flight from Atlanta, the terminal at Denver International hummed with its usual midday energy. Rolling suitcases, echoing announcements, the smell of pretzels and coffee mixing in the air. Near gate B18, a Horizon Skies. Jet sat ready for boarding, its silver wings catching the Colorado sunlight. Inside the cabin, passengers settled in, unaware that the woman walking down the aisle with a training badge wasn't just another crew member. She was something new, a bridge between what had been and what could be. Lila no longer wore the standard flight attendant uniform. Instead, she had a navy blazer with a discreet Human First trainer pin and a calmness in her step that hadn't been there before. She wasn't serving drinks or checking seatbelts today. She was observing, listening, gently guiding. This flight was part of a pilot rollout for Horizon Sky's new Frontline Empathy program, a quiet revolution born from a single, painful moment at 35,000 feet. As she passed row 12, a young boy, maybe 6 or 7, knocked over his juice box. It spilled across the tray table, dripping onto the floor and splashing the leg of the passenger next to him. The boy froze, eyes wide with panic. His mother groaned, already reaching for napkins. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly to the stranger, her voice tight with embarrassment. In the old days, Lila might have rushed over with a stern face, muttering about watching what you're doing or keeping drinks secured. She'd done it 100 times, efficient, correct, but cold. But today, something different happened. She knelt beside the boy at his eye level and smiled. "Happens to the best of us," she said softly. Then she pulled a clean cloth from her kit and handed it to him. "Want to help clean it up together?" The boy blinked, then nodded, relief washing over his face. His mother exhaled, shoulders relaxing. The passenger whose pants were stained even chuckled. "Kid's got good aim," he joked, and the tension dissolved like steam. That small exchange, barely noticed by anyone else, was everything the new program stood for. Not perfection, not robotic politeness, but humanity, connection. The kind of moment that reminds people they're seen, not just served. Back in Los Angeles, the woman who owned the airline sat in her office, not in a high-rise corner suite, but in a modest room near crew operations. Her walls weren't covered in awards or glossy photos. Instead, there were handwritten notes from employees, sketches from kids who'd flown for the first time, and a single framed quote. "How we treat the least seen among us defines who we are." She rarely gave interviews. She never posted about her leadership style on social media. But her influence was felt in quieter ways, in the extra break added to overnight crew schedules, in the new mental health resources available to all staff, in the way supervisors now asked, "How are you really doing?" and meant it. She hadn't made a public spectacle of the slap. She hadn't fired Lila to prove a point. Instead, she'd chosen a harder path, the path of restoration. Because she knew that real change doesn't come from punishment alone. It comes from understanding, from giving people room to grow, from believing that even our worst moments don't have to be our final ones. Word of what happened on that Atlanta to LA flight eventually spread, not through headlines, but through whispers in crew lounges, in training sessions, in late-night conversations between attendants. "Remember that story about the owner who got slapped?" someone would say. And instead of ruining that attendant's life, she gave her a second chance? It became a kind of quiet legend, a reminder that Horizon Skies wasn't just selling seats, it was building a culture. Passengers began to notice the difference too. Not in flashy ways, but in the little things. A flight attendant remembering a regular traveler's coffee order, a gate agent staying late to help a lost elder find their connection, a pilot making a lighthearted announcement that eased everyone's nerves during turbulence. These weren't scripted. They were human. One afternoon, Lila was leading a workshop for new hires. She stood in front of a small group in a sunlit training room, not as a hero, not as a cautionary tale, but as someone who'd stumbled and found her way back. "I used to think being professional meant never showing weakness," she told them. "But real professionalism is knowing your limits and asking for help when you're near them. It's seeing the person behind the passenger number. It's remembering that everyone on this plane, crew and travelers alike, is carrying something you can't see." After the session, a young trainee hung back. "Were you scared?" she asked quietly. "After, you know." Lila nodded. "Terrified. I thought my life was over. But sometimes the thing that breaks you is also the thing that rebuilds you, if you let it." Meanwhile, the woman who owned the airline boarded a routine flight to Seattle. She didn't disguise herself this time. She sat in economy again, not out of secrecy, but because she still believed the truth lived there. As the plane taxied, a flight attendant approached, someone Lila had trained just weeks before. "Ma'am," the attendant said, smiling warmly, "we're honored to have you with us today." The woman returned the smile. "Just glad to be flying with you. No fanfare, no special treatment, just mutual respect, the kind that's earned, not demanded." As the jet lifted into the sky, she looked out the window at the patchwork of neighborhoods below, each one full of people trying their best, making mistakes, hoping for grace. She thought about how easy it would have been to respond to that slap with anger, with power, with finality. But she'd chosen something harder, compassion with accountability. And in doing so, she'd changed not just one life, but hundreds. Back in Denver, Lila finished her shift and walked through the terminal toward the crew parking lot. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft oranges and purples. A group of flight attendants waved as they passed, colleagues who once might have whispered behind her back, but now greeted her like family. She got into her car, started the engine, and took a deep breath. It wasn't perfect. Some days were still hard. But she was no longer running from what she'd done. She was living beyond it, helping others do the same. And high above, somewhere between Denver and Miami, a Horizon Skies plane carried its passengers safely through the clouds, not just with skill, but with heart. Because sometimes the most powerful transformations begin not with a grand gesture, but with a single choice. To respond to hurt, not with more hurt, but with the courage to heal.